For me, it's an honor and a pleasure to introduce Ed Nichols today. So I've been an NTL member for 38 years and I've known Ed for 39. He's been a teacher, mentor, colleague, and friend. It occurred to me this morning that by having both Ed Shine and Ed Nichols at our Jubilee year celebration, we've got the whole system represented. Ed Shine articulates the distinctive features of culture at the organizational level, and Ed Nichols articulates them at the interpersonal, group, and intergroup levels. So Edwin J. Nichols is a clinical and industrial psychologist. He is director of Nichols and Associates Incorporated, an organization development and applied behavioral science consulting firm. He focuses on restructuring organizations to achieve systemic process congruence through the development of cultural competence in leadership. By assessing corporate and organizational systems and structures, he helps organizations achieve systemic congruence. An evaluation of organizational staff and their management styles are examined to ascertain the cultural competence necessary for enhancing leadership capacity and capability. Dr. Nichols' hallmark paradigm, the philosophical aspects of cultural difference, affords insight into the essence of ethnic difference through the lens of the philosophical disciplines of axiology, epistemology, and logic. The awareness of self and others helps in facilitating cultural competence in leadership, which affords the full utilization of a multi-ethnic, pluralistic, linguistically diverse workforce in today's business and organizations operating nationally and globally. This 21st century oriented workforce can provide the added value that advantages organizations by igniting or restoring their competitive advantage. And with that, I give you Dr. Edwin J. Nichols. Yeah, he's, it's his second round, he's, he's, yeah.
Thank you very much. I guess I'm not sure if I'm unmuted. Can everyone hear me? You can hear me. Okay. All right, good. Well, thank you very much, Carl. After such a long and interesting thing, they generally close the coffin and wheel it out of the church. All those good accolades. I'm very honored and very privileged to have the opportunity to share some concepts and ideas with you. Ed Shine on the beginning is 94 and Ed Nichols on the end is 91. So you are really pulling on, we're asking, where are the young people that are going to come along here and do other things? I think that's one of the things the organization really has to put forth efforts to bring more young people into the organization. I have developed a paradigm called the philosophical aspects of cultural difference. And the reason for that is that I've had two experiences in terms of getting the education, the credentials, and running into the reality of racism. When I was growing up, I was always taught that we were a meritocracy. But after these two experiences, one after the master's and then one after the PhD, in being turned away from jobs simply because I'm Black, I became realistic in terms of the Herrenvolk. And this is one of the works that Carl and a colleague wrote about. The United States is a multi-ethnic, pluralistic, and linguistically diverse society. And we are in the competitive global marketplace. And if we do not realize that that is the reality, then we will become a second or third class world power. We have in the United States, we are multi-ethnic, pluralistic, and linguistically diverse. So we have the essence of everything that we need if we can understand each other and apply it. Now, groups and teams have become the unit of production. And this work is given to us by Scott Page, University of Michigan. He tells us that the traditional homogeneous group, which means all white males, is not as productive nor creative as the heterogeneous group, meaning males, females, all the different ethnic groups. When they come together and work, they are more productive and more creative than the traditional all-white male group. And he's done extensive studies on that, and that, as far as the literature is concerned, is established. But the difficulty is, how do you get all these people that are different to work together? And I've thought about that many, many times. And in the thought process about that, Carl didn't tell you, but I studied in Germany and Austria. That's where I did my master's and doctorate. And I went to a Catholic undergraduate college. So that means years and years and years of philosophy. And one of the philosophers that gave me some very interesting insight was Johann Gottfried von Herder. Herder tells us that he held implicitly the view that society is basically an organic whole. He accounted for differences in culture, institutions, and different people, and that was due to geographic conditions. So he's saying that what shapes us, in part, are the geographic conditions under which we, as a society, grow. Then, I was a visiting professor at the University of Ibadan in Nigeria, and one of the leading scholars in psychiatry is Thomas Lambo, who is Nigerian, and he's accredited as being the first Western-trained psychiatrist. And on one occasion, when he was returning to Africa, he was asked by a commentator, what differences do you see between Europeans and Africans? And he simply said, I find Europeans to focus more on the object, and Africans focus more on the relationship. So between what Herder tells me and what I hear from Lambo, things begin to click and pull together. And what is very interesting is that these values that you talk about in philosophy, the study of values, is axiology. And so now, to make that more relevant to this organization, the German university student Kurt Levine, all right, Levine, depends on where you go to school, okay, studied classical philosophy. And the concepts from two Greek philosophers, Epicurus and Herodias, are used in the development of his change theory. So he also used Greek philosophical constructs and thinking in the development of his different theories, because in the German system, philosophy is a foundation. Sometimes it's equivalent to a major, it is a major, in addition to anything else that you take or you study. Okay, now, in looking at what we have, I also wanted to remind people of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where we think about the physical needs, the safety, the love, the esteem, and the self-actualization. So in my paradigm, the philosophical aspects of cultural difference, I look at axiology, which is the value system. I look at epistemology, would ask not what you know, but how you know, the methods by which you know. And finally, logic is the system by which you reason to an answer. So within the time constraints that I have, I'm going to try to look just at the axiology, not the epistemology and logic, of the major ethnic groups in the United States. We have the Native Americans who were already here. You had Europeans who came, brought enslaved people with them, and you had the migration of Asians coming into the West Coast. And in order to do this, I need to talk about the essence of ethnic difference. So when we talk about the essence, people who haven't studied philosophy are maybe questioning, well, what is the essence? And some essence is something that we intuit. So when I'm teaching classes, I talk about it this way. I say, if I'm going to give you three things. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes, envision a specific noun, and then you open your eyes and we discuss it. So I would ask you to close your eyes, that you don't have to do that, but to envision a chair, perhaps even your most favorite chair, and then 3, open your eyes. Then when we collect all of those pictures of a chair, they are completely different from each other. Yet, there's something that enables us, in spite of the differences in all these chairs, to identify it as a chair and not table. And that is to intuit a construct. So you intuit the essence of a construct. And it is not, it doesn't change. In other words, the essence of table remains the essence of table. Even if I use it as something to sit on, you're not deceived by my behavior because the essence remains in and of itself. And that is intuitive. Now, let's begin to look at the different groups. Mother Africa is the source of all places. I want someone to share the screen with me, please. That's not what I want. Okay. All right, let's see. No, let's get out of here. There. Okay. Now, if the highest value lies in the relationship, member to member, classically, I used to say man to man, and the feminists almost beat me to death. So I've changed it to member to member. So if the highest value lies in the relationship, then how does this come about? This is because if you look back at the environment of Africa, if we think also of countries that are pretty much around the equator, you will find that member to member is the highest value because there is no scarcity. Traditionally, historically, in those environments, there's no scarcity. There's enough water. You won't freeze to death. Food is available, omnipresent. If you need shelter, you can weave a thatched roof and you have the shelter that you need from the rain or the sun. So in these environments, all that you want is afforded you. And the most important thing is to realize that in these cultures, the highest value in the relationship, people see themselves to be equal to each other. And that is men and women also in their relationship. Men and women see themselves as being equal. Now, in that you are equal, and all cultures start out with men and women being equal, but things change in different cultures. So if the highest value is in the relationship, and you do something that treats me as less than equal, you have treated me with disrespect, and that destroys the relationship. That is the most important dependent variable that I can share with you in terms of the axiology of African and Latinos are also in that group, and North African Arabs are also a part of that group. So the reality is, if the highest value is in the relationship, people strive, and then you go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The first one and the second one are not realities in terms of the African environment. You have the physical things that you need, you have the safety. And so what you work for is this relationship. That's the primary goal. And in working with people in this group, if they perceive that you're treating them as less than equal, they perceive that as disrespect, and it destroys a relationship. Now, you are my boss, I'm subordinate to you, and I will treat you with whatever is necessary to work together. I'll treat you with deference because that's who you are. But I still expect you to treat me with respect. And this is very often lost in the workplace. So that is the main situation that I wanted to talk about there. The whole idea of all of these things is to survive and thrive. So what does a culture do to survive and thrive? And now in this concept, in the African concept, in these cultures, spiral is the time. So time goes like this in a spiral. When you go to the Inca Maya Aztecs, you'll see temples built where the sunlight will come in at one period and light up the stairwells going up, and the next season light up the stairwell coming down. And you can have a temple which a small window is there. And at a certain point in this spiral of time, it will light up the temple all the way to the bound. So you see that these cultures, the highest values in the relationship, time is spiral. The relationship between men and women is one of equity. And that is because in these cultures, women can take care of themselves. They can get their own food. They can provide their own safety. They have all these things that they could do. So now for the African-American enslaved community, this was exploited. It was a good, because as African-Americans, when the husband was sold to another plantation, the enslaved African woman would have to take care of herself and her children until they were 7 and sold. So greetings are imperative in this culture. And remember that in the work that you do, that when people of this axiology feel that they have been treated with disrespect, it destroys the relationship. You only have to listen to the favorite song of the 21st century with Aretha Franklin talking about RS, and you can finish the rest. Now, in the next group that I want to talk about is the Asian group and Asian culture. The highest value in the Asian culture is the cohesiveness of the group cohesiveness. Now, how is this and how does this come into being? Well, if the highest value is in the cohesiveness of the group, it's essential that we understand what is the essence of groupness. And the way I do anything that I'm doing with Asian cultures is I try to look at the traditional writing of the word in the script of that culture. This is the Chinese word for group. Etymologic, now I'm dyslexic, so you have some dyslexic Chinese, all right? If you look at this first character, it's like king or region. This is sheep, but you're going to look not just at primary, but secondary, tertiary, quadrilateral levels of interpretation. And one of the interpretations is conformity. In monarchy, there's hierarchy. It's a hierarchical system. So if you act as a conformist within the hierarchy, you keep the group cohesive, cohesiveness of the group. Now, the question is, how do you make decisions? In Western culture, it's majority rule. So in Western culture, if you have 1, 2, 3 say yes and 1, 2, 3 say no, one person can shift the balance in terms of whether you do it or not. And sometimes when that occurs, the side effect from that is I was forced to say that the report would be due at noon. All these are saying noon. Our group is saying no. One person says noon, therefore we're all made to do it. Within myself, I still don't feel that I can do it by noon, but I try to do it. I get my things ready. You see me in the hall and you say, Edwin, where's your report? I say, oh, I completely forgot, which is passive aggressive behavior psychologically. Okay. Now, in terms of the highest value lying in the cohesiveness of the group, decisions are made by coming to a consensus. So if you want to understand consensus from the Asian perspective, if you look at the traditional Chinese, right, not simplified, the traditional, this is consensus. When I break this down into smaller constructs, this is the symbol for voice. This is the character for heart. So in order to come to a census, your heart and your voice, your affect and your intellect have to say the same thing. You only have to ask yourself how many times you've said something with your voice you didn't mean with your heart. Well, are you coming to the concert? Are you coming to the program? I shall try as hard as I possibly can to get there. Are you going to help me produce the program? Call me. All of these are things that are said with the voice, not meant with the heart. And in Asian culture, this is not the reality. What you say with your voice, you must mean with your heart. And interestingly enough, if you write the same two words together as a single Chinese word, this is the word for intent. So if I know how you think and feel, I know your intent. If we all share the same intent to work 7 days a week, 12 hours a day to produce 1,500 widgets, then we are prepared to do this part of the colloquy, which is we now can come together. That's unity or coming together and speak through one mouth. That's one and that's mouth. So when the heart and the voice come together, they show intent. When all of us have the same intent, we can then come together and speak through one voice. That way we can act as conformists within the hierarchy and keep the group cohesive. All right. Now, let's look at the Native American group. In the Native American culture, we have the reality of what was expressed earlier, the concept of 4 and 3 forms the whole. So if we take 4, those that travel on 2, those that travel on 4, those that travel with flippers and fins, those that travel with wings and feathers, those that travel, now the set of 3, those that travel under the earth, on the earth, above the earth. Now, this is wholeness, but completeness is oneness with the Great Spirit. That's the axiology, and was expressed with different terms earlier today. So if way up here is the Great Spirit, and you have oneness with the Great Spirit way up here, the question is then, if you have oneness with the Great Spirit up here, would you ever do anything down here to hurt, harm, damage, or destroy? You have Mother Earth that gives you everything that you need. You must respect it, and you must give prayerful thought and constant rethinking things in terms of oneness with the Great Spirit. Now, if you look at this, you might see some Indian jewelry or artifacts that are similar to this concept of the 7 and oneness. Now, with a oneness with the Great Spirit, if that's the highest value, then what we want to examine is the relationship then between men and women. And traditionally, it is equitable. Something was said earlier about the colonialist fathers in forming the Constitution of the United States. Well, the Iroquois chief, and I'm going to slaughter this, so it's Saktigo, was invited to the Continental Congress when they were trying to form the American independence. And it was because in Native culture, particularly in that part of the world, they had developed a system of confederation. And that would be new and interesting because nobody in Europe had confederation. It was a completely new idea. And they asked this chief to come. And when he arrived, the first thing he looked around, he said, "Where are your women?" So this will tell you that in this indigenous culture, women were an integral part of the decision-making. So, all right. Now, to go, I think that this is the most important ideas that I would want to share with you in terms of Native culture. I now want to go to European culture. And let me see what else I have here. Okay. I want to go now to European culture. European culture says that the highest value is in the object or the acquisition of the object, that is member to object. So if the highest value is in the object, and what all strive to do is we're trying to strive and survive. So in order to be alive next spring, you have to survive and strive. Now, how do you survive and thrive in a place that you're just entering at the end of the last ice age and all the ramifications of that? So let's look now and see what would be the object. In other words, in order to survive and thrive and be here around next spring, you would have to have enough what in order to be around next spring? You would have to have enough food. So in essence, food in all of its applications and variants is in philosophical constructs for this example is the object. So if food is the object, then in North Central Europe, 12,000 years ago, or at the end of the last ice age, can you grow food, that is plant seeds, grow the food, harvest it and store it in a month of September or October or November? What about December, January, February, March, April, or even May? Well, some will argue. But in May, in Minnesota, the ground is still what? Frozen. And the upper border with Canada for Minnesota is the border between Switzerland and southern Germany. So that gives you a clue in terms of the European experience and what is going on in this environment. So you have 9 months in which you can grow absolutely nothing. Then the question is, how long is the growing season? Well, the European growing season is 3 months. If everything is not accomplished in that 3-month interval, then you are dead. Dead. Now, that's very important because it governs behaviors. It governs the concept of time. In this culture, time begins at A and ends at B. If you've not accomplished everything at B, you're dead. And there is no, like, I came at A prime and I'm going to complete it at B prime. If you don't finish it at B, then you're dead. What is important to see here is whether this has relevance to our workplace today. Your boss says, I want the deliverable, which is philosophically the object, by the close of the day, close of the growing season, or you're in deep trouble. Now, if you bring the report back to him the next morning, he says, I can't accept it because you have missed the deadline. You see the connection between the collective unconscious that Jung gives us or discusses for us and the relevance as it comes today into these awarenesses. Now, what is very important here is that we live in a Western-dominated society, and the important dependent variable of the Western society is the awareness of scarcity. So in books, in germs, guns, and steel, we have a very important message of why people leave Europe and travel around the world, and then go around the world trying to conquer everyone and put them into colonial situations. That's because you find bounty in these other cultures, and you return to your own culture with scarcity. And if you have this scarcity, then what can you do so that you are alive next spring? What is necessary for you to survive and thrive and be alive next spring? So this enters into all of the interrelationships that people have, group formulations and so forth. The whole concept is around scarcity. And more importantly, it is who controls the object. Now, if we look at the relationships between men and women in this culture, women went out and worked with the men, but if you were in your 3rd trimester, you can't do that. So they would return to the place of where they lived in Europe, and you become observant of everything around you. There's a little goat going into labor. It's having a very difficult time. It nibbles from leaves from that small bush over there. You've observed other animals in labor nibbling from that bush, dilating into labor. Now, if you're a woman, you're in labor, it's going difficulty, what would you be likely to do? And so these kinds of understandings of roots, herbs, barks, grasses, roots, and leaves gives the European woman a pharmacopoeia. And men don't really look at it too much because they're constantly out on the hunt because of the scarcity of food. All right? Now, if you're going to do something that is 3 months before we can't grow anything else, how are you going to know a month, 1 month from another? Well, women had the internal math teacher centuries before men could grasp the concept. This is three menstrual cycles. How do you know 9 months? It's 1 gestation period. So women had these internal understanding of math centuries before men could do it. So we have women that have pharmacopoeia, they have the knowledge of math, and that's just too much information. And when you are counting and measuring, that's how Europeans know value, is how much can you count and measure. That's how you know, that's the epistemology. So you're now giving women an advantage over men. And how did they respond to this? Well, according to European law, European women are the what of their husbands. They're the property. According to European law, when a woman marries, her dowry becomes whose property? Her husband's property. In English common law, if your wife needs disciplining, you can discipline her with a stick. Ordinarily, they would say the size of a thumb. Okay. Now, when I'm doing workshops openly, I generally have the largest Black man I can find in the room come up, and we go through much of this in a way with 3 Black women. Now, in the European tradition, when we talk about the dowry, the property, and so forth, the women acknowledge that, and they go and sit down. When I have this Black group there, then I ask this Black man, I say, now, of these Black women, which one you going to take her money and beat her with a stick? So you get laughter from the whole audience, but you can see that intrinsic into the culture is the idea that if you're going to hit somebody, you have to be, as one very small woman said, yes, you might win the fight, but everyone will know that you were in a fight. And that's the thing that gives equity in these relationships. And of course, we've had some very smart people that were beating Black women only to find that they had a hot grits facial. That's something you'll have to ask Dr. Royal about. She'll tell you about the hot grits facial. I see by my watch, my time is up for today. I would be glad to take questions in any way that is possible. Oh, I would like to say one thing. Let me just say this real quickly. Let me close this out. I'm one of the founding members of the Association of Black Psychologists. And as such, I've been with the organization the whole 52 years. Other ethnic groups have their own psychologists, and they are starting, they're founding, they're moving themselves along. My daughter instituted a grant for mid-career people in those ethnic groups. And so this year, to the Native American group, I gave a scholarship, $2,000 for mid-career Native American psychologists to do her research. Next year, it will go to the Hispanic group, and the year after, it will go to the Asian group. And then the year following, it goes back to the African-American psychologists and Black psychologists. So I want to share that with you. Those are the interactions with which I've had with the different ethnic groups in trying to understand their axiology, their epistemology, and their logic sets. Thank you.
Carl?
Yeah, I'm here.
All
Wow.
right.
Thanks, Ed. That was fantastic. I mean, Ed is like, he's like a great piece of art, or a fine piece of music, because every time he does this, I've been experiencing this forever, and it's always something new that you learn. So enough from me. Let's have folks ask a question, respond, however you choose to.
Carl, remember we're doing the please raise your hands.
Yes, absolutely. And I see we have Abigail,
Okay.
the first to raise her hand, and I'd like to acknowledge her and get her in if we could.
Yes, I think we have a queue.
Okay, yes.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
So Abigail, yeah. So, but I don't have.
I have the queue.
Yeah, yes, that's what I'm saying. I don't have the authorship here. So if you could get her in.
She should be unmuted.
Okay, greetings. Thank you, Carl, for calling on me. I appreciate that. And greetings, Dr. Nichols. As always, you are provoking so many thoughts in my mind simultaneously, but I'll try and focus in on one. What pricked my heart today was the stark comparison between the scarcity mentality and the abundance mentality. And I'm thinking about when that converges in teams that are trying to negotiate this volatile future that we always talk about. What are some ways in which we as consultants can help navigate those two differences?
Great question.
Yeah, that becomes, well, once an individual understands that their culture stems from scarcity, then the idea that presently the dichotomous logic is what you use in European culture. Now, when it's binary, plus, minus, yes, no, there's no issue. But when you corrupt it, you can form isms. So in the corrupting of the dichotomous logic, you make one thing good and the other bad. And in the mind of the individuals where there's scarcity, if you have, I do not have. That's some of the things that you would think with all the land that was available or what was going on, why would you kill off Native Americans in order to have more land? Well, if they have, I don't have. And once you can get past that in a group, that is to help people to understand that yes, scarcity was the surviving modality 4 centuries ago. Today, we're not facing scarcity. What it is now is we're facing positions. So we have quotas in terms of how many can come in and what we can do with so forth and so on. So the best thing is to get people to understand that if we are to survive as a nation, each person must recognize what their axiology is, its limitations, and its greater factors. When you recognize that one of your limitations is you're constantly thinking about scarcity, then you recognize that there's not going to be scarcity here in this particular group. We are going to work together to accomplish the goals and the objectives. But until you can incorporate that, internalize that idea that there's no need for scarcity, you don't have to always be the one. That's where we have the conflict. Let me give you an example. Individuality is a very important thing in Western culture. What is unthinkable by other ethnic groups is you have the basketball team that won the national basketball thing. Hooray! But what does everyone want to know? Who is the most valuable player? Now, how could he be the most valuable player if he didn't have team? But you see, if you think in terms of individualism, that is what you're going to have, this constant struggle between the two cultural reference. But once the understanding is, I don't need to have that behavior in this group, then you can come together and function. But unless they know the history and the philosophical constructs behind that, they behave in the same manner.
Yes. So I don't know how we are on time. Thanks so much for that, Ed. And Abigail, thanks for asking that question. It was a great one. And someone help me. I see.
I'm here to help you.
Great. So we got Claire and Deep. Did you see who was first?
Claire is first.
Claire's first. Ladies first. All right. Let's hear from Claire.
And we have about 10 minutes.
Okay.
All right, okay. Am I on now?
Yes, you're on.
Oh, I was so looking forward to this presentation, Dr. Nichols, and I have in my files, see, I have a file that says Nichols, and I have this chart that I have used. Nichols' model of philosophical aspects of cultural difference. I've used it for decades when I was teaching in a master's program of intercultural management. And I wished I had seeing your presentation because there's so much richness and background that I did not present. You know, just understand and the way you and it presented it by drawing in that informal kind of way that was fun. And just giving the background of where this may have come from the notion of scarcity. I was going to ask a question about individualism, and you just got into this a little, because the United States is the most individualistic in the world. But you chart, you know, you talked about the Asian people to group and African people to people, and I wonder if you could say some more about the relationship in the European model about the relation to object and how individualism became so predominant.
Well, if there are limited supplies, you have to get your own. And the only way you can accomplish that, you're the one at the top. If you travel throughout Germany today, you'll see every 15 kilometers, you'll see ruins of some structure to protect your object, your grain, your harvest, what it is. Castles, forts, all kinds of things, all over the culture. So these things are, if the highest value is in the object or the acquisition of the object, then this object belongs to me. That's why in Europe, you don't have the concept of sharing until Christianity comes in. Then you begin to get the idea of sharing. But before that, you don't share. Let me give you a very practical example. If it takes 10 bushels to survive the long winter, 1 bushel each month plus, just in case something happens, and I've harvested 14, so that's a +3, you come to me and you ask me to loan you or give you those 3. Well, if I give you those 3, what's going to happen when those three are out? Where will you come to take from me? What if we have rain and I can't plant and it extends beyond the beginning of my growing season? I have to have reserve. So the idea then is the only way you can survive is as an individual. And in this country, you had the rugged individualists that went out west, quote unquote, and you had people in single covered wagons venturing into into what is now Ohio, the Western Reserve.
Excuse me, sorry for cutting you off. In the interest of time, I don't know how much more we have left.
Go ahead.
And sorry, Claire, I'd like to let Deet have an opportunity to ask his question and for Kirad as well to have a chance. Yes.
Thank you. So
I'm sorry, excuse me, Kirad, Deet's next, and then you. Deet's next. Deet, would you go ahead?
Sorry.
That's okay. It's all right.
I'll be quick.
You've changed. I remember. So we're good.
More an observation for the sake of time. Just saying, I share with Claire the experience of having the philosophical aspects of cultural difference in my files since the early 90s, after a presentation by Dr. Nichols in Cincinnati. And because of Dr. Edwin Nichols and because of another mentor, Dr. Ollie Malone, I pursued and have been working in this area of inclusion, inclusive thinking, and attitudinal change for a while. I consider these individuals to be bedrock to what became a path that I went on. So I have to say thank you and elevate these gentlemen. But I just wanted to share one observation for NTL as a whole, that when Dr. Nichols speaks of this concept of approaching the idea of approaching the conversation of differences between groups based upon their philosophical, their axiological and epistemological difference, that for me is an action learning opportunity to beta test. Can we leverage the concept of awareness of scarcity at a deep level to open the conversation of self-awareness around difference? And it may have already happened in NTL. I've only been a member since 2005, but I am percolating on this concept of a lab, a T group that is centered or cornerstoned by the concept of awareness of scarcity as it manifests in today's behavior. For instance, the MAGA movement,
D,
fear and loss of position.
I'm so sorry. I'm going to need to stop you as well. We're at our time limit, and we do have a program for lunch, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to really get up and stretch and move around a little bit. Thank you. Kirat, you got
Kirat?
90 seconds.
Thank you.
90 seconds.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks,
So
Dee.
I'm struck by this cultural differences that Dr. Nichols has brought out. So I'm wondering about the culture of NTL itself and the backdrop of what Shma talked about earlier today. And how does NTL go global? The basic culture has been American, which is individualistic. So if we need to go global, what kind of cultural change has to happen within the NTL fraternity or the NTL organization? And how do we bring it about?
Yes, my contention is that once a group of individuals who are different come together and understand the essence of their own individual, the essence of their ethnic identity. In other words, once you really understand what your value is, how you reason, how you learn and know, then you can work together very quickly. In Asian culture, the capacity to see the whole and the part simultaneous is indigenous to the culture. For an example, something as simple as rug weaving. You make the border here, but by the time you finish the rug, the border up to the top has to be the same as the bottom. No one unrolls it all to look at it. These little individual women out in the middle of nowhere that we see are illiterate and all these other things are carrying the indigenous epistemology because they can see the rug, the whole, and all of the parts and little sections of it simultaneously. And that is what we have to be able to say, all right, when groups come together, if one group is able to see the whole and the part simultaneously, and another can only see a part using the thought process of I'm in the wrong space. Okay, all right. Counting and measuring comes to us from Democritus, the philosopher, where he gives you just parts. They become, he calls them atoms, and they become a whole. Now, if your thinking always starts in terms of how many little parts do we have, and you have someone from an African concept who's giving the big picture and cutting to the chase, which is holistic thinking and critical path analysis, sitting next to someone from Asia who was looking at the whole and the part simultaneously, unless people know that, then you can't do anything, you can't make progress. Because you put an idea out there, someone will start cutting it down, saying, well, you didn't think of this, you didn't think of that, and you're saying, it is there, but you just don't see it. Oh, well, you think that I couldn't see it? But if you're going to start with little parts to the whole, that's one way of looking at the world. But you have other people who just get the big picture and use critical path analysis to justify. Then in the Asian culture, you have people that are able to see the whole and the part simultaneously. Just think of that woman sitting in the middle of nowhere on the dirt floor, weaving a rug. And nobody tells her that the bottom border has to be exactly the same as the top, or unroll it, or look at a pattern or something. She has carried it in her head, and she can do it. And that, to me, is once you understand those differences, then you can work together more successfully. Because one person doesn't think that mine is the only way, I'm the smartest one here. There has to be some humility.
Thank you.
Very welcome. Carl, you're mouthing, but we can't hear you.
Yes. Carl, let's close it out.
Absolutely. I just want to say thanks to everyone. Great questions, Ed. You were phenomenal as per usual. Thank you. Thank you. See
Thank you for
everybody.
the opportunity. I appreciate it very much.
All right.
Yeah.